Okay, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. Okay, my family moved to Greenville, South Carolina before I was 3. Okay, according to my wife, I am still a Yankee. I pointed out to her that my mother's family came over with frickin' Oglethorpe in Georgia. Okay, as long as there's been a colonialist imperial footprint in Georgia, there have been Goddards down there. Okay, doesn't matter. You were born in in Ohio. You're a Yankee. I'm like, be that way. Now I have to tell you though, you talk about. Thank you. You talk about.
You can keep talking for as long as you want.
You talk about people who are. One of my professors at Appalachian State was Tom Keefe. Well, it wasn't actually one of my professors. I didn't have any courses with him. He was in the department. He and I really liked each other. He had a Funky Winker Bean cartoon on his office door, and it's the first panel is, from the above we can see that. Second panel is A, France lost the war. Next panel is B, France won the war. Next panel is C, France wasn't in the war. Next panel is D, all of the above. And the last panel is that the correct answer is D because the question is about World War II. Okay, so that was Tom, all right? Well, his father was Howie Keefe, who was an ace in the 8th Air Force during World War II, and who was a Brits out Irishman from the day he was born, okay? Contributor to the IRA. He was so glad that by the time he went over there, the Germans weren't bombing the Brits anymore because that way he didn't have to shoot down people who were trying to bomb British cities. He was that kind of guy. And he flew the P-51 racing plane Miss America for years after the war. In a lot of ways, nice guy as long as you weren't English. Okay. So for his 50th anniversary, he takes his wife to Ireland and he hires a genealogist to track the family down. And they've been over there for about a month, and the genealogist calls and says, "Mr. Keefe, I have some wonderful news for you. I found your first recorded Irish ancestor." "Really?" "He came over as a farrier in the army of William Cromwell." Tom says, "It's sad when a professional Irishman dies." But, I was thinking about that with what's going on over in the Middle East right now. Because, those kinds of hatreds, man, they're... Now, another one of my Irish friends told me before we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, he said, "Sharon, you should have talked to us first. We've been blowing people up for God forever." Okay, but they pretty much got it out of their system now. Yeah. Although my all-time favorite Irish joke was told to me by the same Irish friend, and the orangeman in this village is dying. Okay, he's like 97 years old. He's been the leader of the orangemen in his little village since he was 20. Okay, 77 years. And he's on his deathbed, and his surviving sons and his grandsons are gathered around, and he plucks his son's sleeve, and he says, "Fetch a priest." "What was that, Father?" "Fetch a priest." "I do not think I heard you correctly, Father." "Fetch a priest. I tell you, there's not much time." So the call goes out to the other end of the village, and the Catholic priest hears that the orangeman is converting on his deathbed. He runs to the house. He hears his confession. He gives him extreme unction, and he returns to his church rejoicing that yet another Protestant soul has been snatched from the lip of hell. And his sons and his grandsons gather around him, and they say, his oldest son says, "Father, I cannot believe you did that after 77 years. What were you thinking?" And his father says, "Oh, hold your noise. If somebody's got to go, better it's one of them than one of us." Okay. And it's funny, but the mindset behind that. Anyway, if we get me started talking on current events, it will be an interesting discussion, but it won't have a lot to do with books. I'm guessing since you're here that you kind of know who I am. I should tell you, if you're interested, that next month I will be offering an online series of classes, video classes, in how to build characters for books. It'll be 5 parts. It'll be a multi-tiered operation. For the base fee, you get you get access to the video classes, and then after each class airs, we'll do like one a month. After each class airs, there will be a 45-minute to an hour live stream Q&A. And for the second tier, you get into the queue to ask questions, because we have to limit how many we can get into the queue. Then for a slightly increased, a moderately increased fee, a limited number, right this minute we're thinking that it probably would be under 30 people would be able to submit 3 questions to me in writing electronically that I would respond to electronically, and then we would have like a 20-minute follow-up video conference in which you could expand on it. And then for an exorbitant fee, a group limited to probably, right this minute I'm thinking 10, would write me a 5,000-word short story, which I would individually critique, and we would video conference after the critique. You would get an opportunity to revise it, and if at the end of the revising process I thought it was good work, I would give you a letter of introduction to go with it for submission to a traditional publisher, or obviously to any, non-traditional publisher that you want to take it to. I think it's going to be good.
Is there a 6th tier where we come hang out at your house with you and Sharon?
No, afraid not. No, sorry. But that would be, and like I say, the link isn't up yet. Jonathan and Jennifer Yanez are helping me run this. Jen has established the site and so forth. We just don't have the link up yet. It'll be going up probably on Facebook and on my page, and anybody who wants to share it probably within the week. So just thought I'd mention it. We really kind of hope to have everything up and running before 20Books for the rollout on it. And Baen is going to be involved in this at one remove. David Ashariad, I can never pronounce his last name right, is going to moderate the Q&A for us and manage the questions. And so that's my shameless plug. I don't do very many of them, so I don't do them very well, but that's what we're doing. Okay, so I think it probably would make sense to take questions instead of my just jumping out there and telling you what a wonderful, you already know what a wonderful guy I am, or you wouldn't be here. So does anybody out there have a question they would like to particularly address? Because I guarantee you, I can fill 45 minutes. Quit shaking your head back there.
I'm nodding. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Don't too hard.
Seriously, does anybody have a question that they would? Okay, you get the first one, but you don't get the second one. Okay, good.
Is this my only question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Make it good.
I do like to talk a lot.
Yeah.
That's what he's going to do.
So in my series, I'm running, it's not a problem, but I get a lot of, how did you handle Haven being obviously really bad, but also deal, like the reality of what Haven was, right? Because like if you read the books, you know how horrible Haven is at certain points during the series. How did you handle that in a way that allowed people to sort of see the reason behind it, and even if they don't agree with the reason behind it, to sort of see the reason behind why they did the horrible things? Or did you not? Did you just get called a bunch of names and, told that you're a horrible person?
The only name that I got called was I got called an anti-Semite because by one guy who was obviously weird, because the faithful from Grayson named their planet Masada and removed the New Testament from their Bibles. Because if Christ had been the Messiah, then obviously none of this mess that they were in could possibly have happened. And so that made me an anti-Semite, because if you take the Old Testament out of the Bible, you're basically looking at the Torah, okay? And they named their planet Masada. So obviously, I was anti-Semitic. You know, the notion that what I was saying here was deliberately making the point that it doesn't matter what something is called, what matters is what it is, and that the bad guys are going to choose names that people are going to think are good names. I had that whole conversation with, all right, you asked about Haven.
Well,
Okay.
the bad
No,
guys.
because this ties into that. Jim Baen gets the manuscript for On Basilisk Station. Now, this is you can send it to him in email. This is pre-cell phones. I mean, yeah. This is the dark ages. Al Gore has not yet invented the internet, my friend. Okay. And I get this long-distance call from New York, and it's Jim. He's like, Dave, I got a problem. I've been reading the manuscript. And I said, yeah? He said, yeah. He said, I'm 2 pages in, and I have a problem. And I'm like, okay. And he said, you've made the good guys the Star Kingdom of Manticore, and you made the bad guys the Republic of Haven. And I said, yeah. He said, well, anybody who saw Star Wars knows the Republic is always the good guys. And a manticore is a man-eating monster. And so you got the Star Kingdom of the man-eating monster versus the Republic of safe place to live. He said, I have a problem with this. And I said, Jim, that's kind of the point. You know. And he said, and I said, okay, Jim, except for centaurs, find me a mythological creature that didn't eat people if it could catch it. If it could catch him. I said, yeah, that's a non-starter for your problem. Okay. I said, and we went back and forth, and I finally said, I said, Jim, the bad guys do not wake up one morning and say, I know we'll call ourselves the omnivoracity of evil. Okay, they just don't do that. Okay, and so we went back and forth, literally for 40 minutes, and finally said, well, I still don't like it, but you've explained it, I guess I can live with it, you know. And I thought, my God, you know, so 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. He's like, you made her ugly. And I'm like, what? You made her ugly. I said, I did not. She thinks she's homely, okay, because she's big, she's tall, you know, her mom's this gorgeous, petite little person. You know, just look 6 pages further, and you can actually hear the pages turning, you know. And he says, but by then it's already set. And you okay, Baen heroines have to be such that men lust after them and women lust to be them. And I said, Jim, that is the most sexist thing I ever heard in my entire life. And he said, sexist, schmexist, it sells books. You know, so I'm like, okay. So I moved the scene where McKeon meets her and reflects that the file imagery doesn't do justice to her, et cetera, et cetera. We moved it forward, and I'm thinking, okay, we are now 11 pages into the book, and we've spent 2 hours on the phone. You know, he didn't have a single other problem with the entire book. Okay, but to get back to your question, I realized how to fix Jim's problem. But the type for On Basilisk Station had already been set. And this was just stick it in the computer and move it around typesetting. It was actual physical type that had to be printed out, pasted down, and shot. But the solution was to call them the People's Republic of Haven, which was code word for bad guy republic. The problem was, if you go back and you read Basilisk Station, you'll find that they're only called the People's Republic about 4 times in the entire book, because we had to find places where it wouldn't change the line break before we could put it in. In Honor of the Queen, the typesetting process was not quite as far along, but we still had issues there, so they're not referred very often to as the peeps or whatever. But after that, we're off to the races, you know, and everybody knows what's going on. Jim was so happy. Okay. But in answer, that's part of the answer to your question in a way. The main thing is, if you have built the societies, the world, that your characters are going to be interacting in. If you built it properly, then there should be enough windows for your readers to see into the basements of the various societies and whatnot that you've constructed. Okay, now you can cheat. You can give them false windows that make them think better or worse than they ought to. But by and large, I think that your ability to have sympathetic elements built into the bad guys, part of it is that you have good people on that side, and the fact that they're good people living in that system. And many of them are going to have problems with the system. They're going to be fighting against the system or whatever, but that still humanizes that entire society. And it also happens to be much closer to truth than everybody on the bad guy side has a mustache expressly so he can twirl it, kind of thing. But the key to any good story are the characters. The readers don't care about the characters, they're not going to care about anything else. Okay? The second key to a good story is developing your own voice, because that's what brings readers to you, is your voice, the way you tell stories. They can find somebody else who's going to tell the same kind of story. They're looking for somebody who tells the story the way that you tell it, the way that you build the world, the way that you structure it, your word choices in dialogue, how you open the characters to them, make the characters available. Yes.
Along that line, how do you write someone who's totally despicable and redeem them? I'm thinking Prince Norman.
Oh, and redeem them at the end of the day?
And redeem them, yes.
Well, you have to be careful about how you made them despicable. Okay, for example, with Narman, and Narman is actually a pretty good example. I think Oscar Dieter from Insurrection is another good example. You can do it by changing the information available to the despicable character in a way that causes a smart, honest, despicable character to reevaluate what he or she thought was the way the world worked. Okay? You can confront them with the reality of, they could be the banality of evil in many ways. They're part of the system. This is the way it works. This is the way it's always been, and I'm just better at doing it than anybody else. And then bring them face to face with the consequences of the system that they're a part of. Robert Duchesne in Safehold. Okay? You can have a character like Narman who does despicable things, but you don't know when you first meet him what his motivations for doing them are. You just know what he's doing and how he's interacting with the characters around him. You don't get an internal perspective on why Narman is doing what he's doing, really, until he has the conversation with Pine Hallow, in which he says, Cheris is absolutely right. Okay? So there are ways you can do it. The character has to still be who the character was. All right? But depending on what view you give the reader of that character, how you establish who that character is and what they're doing, all right? Then you can also do it, it's like the Major Fandus, who is the head of Duchesne's bodyguard, who was planted on him by the Inquisition. Okay, you don't find out until the final volume in the original war that he betrayed the Wilson brothers, because he was ordered to by Howard as the only way to protect him as one of the people working against the Inquisition from the beginning. And so he's a double agent. He's actually almost a triple agent, okay? And when you reach the end of the book, you realize this is one of the strongest, best characters in the entire book. But that's not at all who you thought he was until you reach that point, okay? So partly it depends on how you structure what the character's function is going to be, how you introduce the reader to the character, how you expand the reader's knowledge of that character. And then the events you give that character that affect how he or she changes. I am a big believer, and I think you will see this in most of my books, in characters who work their way from really bad initial positions. And I'm not speaking about bad positions for them, but positions that definitely have them on the wrong side of the angels, okay? And they find, for want of a better term, redemption, and become someone that you're pulling for. When you read Honor the Queen, most of the folks who read Honor the Queen hated the Graysons right up until the moment that Raoul Courvoisier had dinner with the Protector's cousin, the Admiral of the Fleet. I turned 71 last week, so my ability to keep track of things is not as good as it used to be. But anyway, when they have that conversation in which Grayson is explained to a Manticoran how we came to be here, how we came to be what we be, and they begin trying to grapple with the challenge that Honor and the other women in Manticoran service represent, and they're honestly trying to do it. Okay? By the end of that book, people are standing up and cheering for the Graysons. They say, "You go, Grayson, you go," you know. And it's because of the way in which I revealed them to you as the book went along. Okay? And not just by their actions, but also by Honor's actions, and how that impacted on them. Okay? And there are still Graysons who are really pieces of crap. I mean, you know, it's like Samuel Mueller and Stadtholder Burdett, you know, kind of thing. So I didn't try to say to you, and by the way, everything will be magically okay. All right? But I'll say this too. It is a mistake to try too hard to decide that a character is going to be one of your redemptive characters from the beginning. If you build real human beings into your books, you will find opportunities for them to grow and change, especially if you're a series writer like I am. You will find opportunities for those characters to grow and change and become someone other than who you had them originally pegged to be. You have to be open to those opportunities, and you have to be willing to take them. It's a mistake to get too thesis bound on what you're going to do here. I have worked with at least one co-writer who does his outline, and by God, everything is going to happen in that outline when the hell he said it was going to happen, no matter what he has to do to make it work that way. And it could be very damaging to what you're trying to do. My advice, my most fundamental advice, build the world and build the character who's going to be your primary character, your important characters. Build them first before you do anything else, before you build the plot, okay, before you think about the plot. You have a character, you have a story you want to tell. You know where that story is going to begin roughly, you know where it's going to end. Okay, build the world that's going to happen in. Know that world. If it's the present day, do your research. Okay, if it's a future or a fantasy, build the damn world. Build the societies, build the structures. Have a handle on the technology so that you're not going to have wild inconsistencies flipping around in there. Do that work. I did 80,000 words on the Honorverse before I wrote the first word of On Basilisk Station. Okay? Then build your primary characters. Know where they came from. Know who they are. Know why they have the attitudes that they have. Okay? Don't try to build them in excruciating detail, but you need to have the skeletons of the character firmly in place before you can start building the muscle tissue and stuff around that. Okay? After you've built the world, after you know the kind of the story you want to tell, and you know who you're going to be telling it about, you'll find that the plot starts suggesting itself to you in an awful lot of ways, because by building the world the way you've built it, you've built places for that character's feet to stand as the story proceeds. okay? And that's one of the things I talk about a lot in this workshop that we're going to be doing. I break it down into the 5 pillars that I think go into building a character. I'm not going to try and go into all of them here because it would be an infomercial, and and also because there's not time, okay, to do it. But there are certain things that I think about when I'm getting ready to build a character. And then it's not just how you build the character, it's what you do with the character after you've built him or her. I've had, I can't begin to count how many people I've met who have come up to me and have said, how do you write convincing female characters? I can't imagine why they think someone who looks like me would have a problem with that. Especially since, they started asking me that back when I still walked around in my motorcycle leathers and had the big braid down the back, but that was a while ago. But the answer is very simple, and the answer is that I don't build convincing female characters. I build convincing human beings who happen to be female. Okay, it is a horrible mistake to decide I need a character to be female, I need a character to be gay, I need a character to be whoever, and then build that character for that purpose. You may have a character who's going to fill that role, but you don't build the character for the purpose. You build a character who then carries the weight of that role in the story that you are telling, but who is a well-rounded, fully developed human being. And that's when people talk about the number of named characters in David Weber novels. Okay, well that's because I'm not going to have a character who's the lieutenant 4 times. Okay, if I'm going to have a character who's going to be, that character has a name. If you looked at my notes on the book, you'd find the character's name, you'd find the character's age, you'd find the character's height, you'd find a thumbnail of the character's coloration, and so forth. And I usually have at least one hook that I build in, like, plays poker, member of the SCA, whatever, that I can come back to. What that means is that those characters have depth for the reader. There's a name there, okay? There's a person there behind that name. It's not just the lieutenant, okay? But it also means I have a really, really deep bench if I decide that I need to go back and find a character that I can incorporate to carry weight. And you suddenly realize, what? We met this character 7 books ago, when she was on Honor's ship as a communications tech. Okay, yeah, kind of thing. Ginger Lewis and Aubrey Wanderman are examples of that. Anton Zilwicki is an example of that, if you think about it. But I couldn't have done the scene in The Short Victorious War where Zilwicki loses his wife and comforts his daughter without building characters who were very important for that book, but who at that time I had no plans to use anywhere else ever again. Invest in those characters too when you're writing. Okay? People have asked me, how do you make me care about a character in 3 lines so that I want to throw the book across the room when you kill him, a chapter later? And I said, because I made that a human being to you, not a character in a book. Okay? And the reason that character got killed, however many pages later, was probably because I write military science fiction and I refuse to write pornography. And military science fiction in which only the bad guys get killed, any good guys who get killed die instantly and painlessly, and people can wade to their boot tops through the blood of their own crewmen and not carry the ghosts with them. That's porn. Okay? It's also incredibly unrealistic. It's not the way it works. And the vast majority of Americans, some of you have heard me say this many times before, the vast majority of Americans have 0 personal experience with genuine violence. We are the most protected society in the history of the frickin' world, people. And we talk about what a violent society we are and everything else. Okay? Now, your yardstick for your society should be internal to your society. You shouldn't say, you know what, we're better than the Mongols were, so it's all cool, okay? That is not what I am saying here. But what I am saying is that human beings everywhere have this tendency to believe that other human beings living anywhere else are just like them. And they are not. Trust me. I wish more Americans got to travel to Europe, to the Middle East, to Asia, some of the places that I've been, to have firsthand experience of the difference in thinking. For example, one of the things that is a real problem for Americans looking at what's going on in the Middle East right now, and to look at what's coming out of Iran all the time and everything else, is we are an essentially secularized, pluralistic society with a specific separation of church and state. Okay? Iran is a theocracy, people. There is no division between church and state. And that is just night and day in terms of attitudes and motivations and so forth. And a whole bunch of Americans do not have the personal experience to understand that that could be what's happening. Okay? Now that's a real life example of something that needs to be borne in mind when you're writing. Every time you write, whether you want to or not, you step up onto a soapbox. Your characters are informed, they're created based on your views. Your villains are based on your views and your understandings of the world. Okay? Therefore, everything that you write, whether you intend it to or not, is going to have a certain push where attitudes and beliefs are concerned. You owe it to everyone involved in the book to be as fair in building the societies you don't agree with as the ones you do agree with. But if I take an idea that would otherwise be anathema to you, I put it into the attitudes of a character who you love, and I have that character reach that belief by doing it in a logical progression, I have suddenly made that idea that otherwise you would reject out of hand and abominate, maybe correctly, okay, but I have made that idea more accessible and acceptable to you because you've been involved in the thought processes of somebody you like and admire who holds that belief. Okay? I try very, very hard not to hammer people with politics in my books. It's difficult because the books are so tied up with politics in the basis for the wars and everything else. But I try to play fair. A lot of the liberals in the Star Kingdom of Manticore are idiots or corrupt, like Haussmann and Yukiev. Okay, but then you have Cathy Montaigne. All right, you have other liberals who are they absolutely walk the walk as well as talking the talk. Okay, the Conservative Association are among the most contemptible people in the entire Star Kingdom. Okay, they're constantly abusing their power. They're doing all the things that basically conservative power mongers are accused of doing. Okay, the good guys in my books are almost always the folks who are, for want of a better term, the moderates. Okay, rejecting both extremes. Although the real key to who the good guys in my books are is who takes responsibility. The good guys are the responsibility takers. The bad guys are the responsibility evaders, or the people who deliberately ignore their responsibilities in order to increase their own power, their own advantage, their own privileges. Honor Harrington does not say, not my monkey, it's not my problem, I didn't create this. She says there's a problem here and I can do something about it. That means I have a responsibility to do something about it. Okay, and that's why people will follow her straight to the gates of hell. And when you find people in real life who are like that, you'll find that they have that same effect on the people around them. They are not as rare as we often think they are, They are a hell of a lot rarer than we could wish they were in real life. And unfortunately, especially in a period of partisan politics like we have today with the ferocity of the divides between us, fewer and fewer of them find their way into politics. I think seriously, the closer the closer you get to the purely local level, the more likely you are to find people who are not in it to game the system. But as you get further and further towards the top of the pyramid, that's the way the game's played. Okay, so they're part of the system, and that's the way they play it. I do have to say that Senator Fetterman, who is not one of my favorite people, in many ways, I loved. Did any of you see his one-liner to the heckler who was yelling at him? And he said, "I've had a stroke. I don't understand people very well anymore," or something like that. It was kind of like, sit down, shut up, kind of thing. And I thought, well, okay, one of the things that you have to be open to in the characters in your books is something that is really hard for us to do in real life. And that's to be open to the fact that just because you disagree with somebody about 90% of what they believe doesn't mean that you have to disagree with 100% of what they disbelieve. Okay, that is in fact the nature of what living in a pluralistic, democratic society is supposed to be about, is finding what you do agree with. You may not believe this, but I was raised a hard left Democrat. Okay, I really, really was. And my mom, to the day of her death, was befuddled by the fact that somehow, I had strayed. My dad knew exactly how it worked, because he told me, he said, "David, when you retire, I want you to move to Chicago." I said, "Dad, I've been in Chicago on the lakefront in January, and I was raised in Greenville, South Carolina. What could possibly possess me to retire to Chicago?" He says, "But Dave, okay, when you did, then when you died, you could do something decent and vote Democratic for the next 20 years. He was a Chicago boy who knew how it worked, okay? And that's the way politics work, okay? But what brought me to that is Bill Maher, because I know that there are innumerable things that Bill Maher and I would disagree on, okay? But there's probably an equally large number of things that he and I would agree on. And he is one of the people out there who is willing to share that with you, okay, even when the other guys on his side are going to be pissed with him. And even knowing that the guys on the other side aren't going to invite him into their lodge, even if he says them, okay? We need more people like that. And we need them to have venues that will let them do it, even if they aren't hugely successful media persons already, okay? And that is something that you need it in your books, not because you're expressing your own political views or you're making them available, but because by doing so, the people who are reading your books will care about the characters on both sides of the issue. Okay? If it's an honest disagreement on a specific point where two characters may otherwise agree with one another, and it's a problem for them because it's a disagreement that they have, think about how human that makes those characters. Think about how that invites you into them when you're reading their story. Okay? Because they're really wrestling with it. All right? Or they're saying, you know what? I totally disagree with you on that. But what the hell? Okay? We got these other things we agree on. We got these problems we got to deal with. I'm big enough that I can say, yeah, you're wrong about that. But you're still my friend, and we're still going to do what we need to do. Okay? And that is an essential element of how humans work. when they're not just looking for rocks to hit each over the head with. Okay, I mean, seriously, think about it in your own lives. And that's the characters, the world that you're trying to invite your readers into. I would also say that it is, you get this advice to write what you know. I don't know any starship captains. Okay. I put an ad out, but nobody answered. Now there are places you can go to find parallels. For example, if you want to know how somebody captaining a long haul space vessel, whether it's a starship or just look at nuclear submarines. Okay, very good model for you to build off of. If you can do your research, and you should. Okay, thanks to St. Al and the internet, you do not have an excuse for not doing your research. And trust me, there will be a reader out there who knows what you got wrong. Okay? And you will hear from that reader eventually. All right? That obviously has never happened to me because I don't get things wrong. But, one of my favorite authors is Dean Koontz. Okay? One of his researchers obviously misplaced a decimal point. Koontz is convinced that every Uzi has a 300-round magazine. Now, those of us who are shooters know how much 300 rounds of 9mm ammunition weigh. Okay? You would have a very stable platform with a 300-round magazine on an Uzi because it would be so long that it would have little wheels on the bottom and be right at eye level when you got ready to shoot. Okay? And so every time I hit that, I go twang, and I just got to go, okay. It's Dean. It's okay. Breathe, Dave. Go on. Get to the next paragraph. But, well, yeah, Or the guy who has been firing the .45 and he hasn't lowered the hammer or anything else, and he needs to make a point to somebody who's got at gunpoint. So to make the point, he cocks the automatic. Unless he let the hammer down, baby, it's cocked. But the little stuff is what it's easiest to get wrong. Okay? So if this isn't actually your area of expertise, okay, and you know somebody whose area of expertise it is, get them to do a beta read on the section where you're doing this stuff. Okay, I know a guy who was an instructor at Thunder Ranch. How many people know what Thunder Ranch? Okay. For those of you who don't, Thunder Ranch was one of the premier firearms training programs in the entire, on the face of the planet. Okay. And so this guy was an instructor out there, and he was reading the Eric Flint's Ring of Fire. And there's a scene in it where Julie takes a shot at 900 meters, standing offhand with her telescopic sight. And the only reason that she doesn't hit her target in the head is that he moves, and so instead of hitting him in the head, she just takes his jaw out, kind of thing. And Carl sent me an email. He said, I love Eric's books, but tell him God couldn't have made that shot. Kind of thing. Okay. And I also, and Eric, God bless him. I love him. I miss him. Okay, but you know Arthur Clarke's law that any sufficiently advanced, that was Eric and computers. Okay, they were magic. Okay, he had no clue how they worked and what you could and couldn't do with them. But he wanted to write about brilliant hackers. And in the last book that we did together, it was a problem. Okay, and I had to redo every single one of I had to redo the entire book, actually. Although that was not really Eric's fault. There were other factors involved there. That's getting into collaboration. There were a lot of factors, but we were actually finishing that book. I was handing in the last pages while they were handing me the pages I'd handed in the day before, already copy edited, and they were already setting type before I'd finished writing the book, because I hadn't gotten the manuscript from Eric in time, and then there had been major problems with it, which were not Eric's fault. They were a consequence of the fact that he was using my characters who he hadn't used before, so he had them doing things they wouldn't have done, and he was pushing the storyline forward rather than following behind where the timeline had advanced to in the universe the way that it was in the other books, and he was doing the first draft on it. So it just created problems that needed to be dealt with. But do your research, okay? And there are going to be things that you don't know that are just going to go by you. And that's going to be, I just finished working with a friend of mine on a short story, and the executive officer has summoned this ensign to his office on shipboard. And he's not going to ream him out, okay, he's actually going to give him a condemnation. But he begins the conversation by looking at this ensign and saying, "Thank you for coming so promptly." XOs do not tell ensigns thank you for coming promptly when they are ordered to his office. Now, they may say, "Where the hell were you? It took you 30 seconds too long to get your sorry ass in here." Okay, kind of. But they don't thank you for being prompt in reporting where you were supposed to be. That's not how it works. And that's one of those examples of things that you don't know that you don't know. And that's why it's a good reason to have beta readers in there. I don't use them too much. I do have a first readers list. Those are people who get the manuscripts at the same time it goes to Baen. But that's because most of what I'm writing about are things that I do know from personal experience or that I have already researched. I'm a historian, okay? I fell in love with history in the 5th grade, people, okay? And in the 5th grade, I was 10, because I started at 5, okay? So that's 61 years that I've been reading history, okay? When you start building societies in the future, having all that history tucked away in the back of your brain is incredibly useful. Now that I can't share with you, all right? I can share skills about how you use what you know, but I can't share that knowledge base with you. The internet is a pretty good substitute if you're willing to go out there and use it. You can find, you need to know how big that fireball is going to be when the kinetic projectile hits the ground at 34 kilometers per second. You can find a place to calculate that on the internet. You need to figure out what the time dilation effect for two ships, both traveling at very high relativistic velocities, but different velocities, how much time is going to pass in the base universe, how much time is going to pass for ship A, how much time is going to pass for ship B, what their relative decision loops are going to be. You can figure that out. You can incorporate it into the story. And if you do, it gives you a degree of verisimilitude that the reader just sucks up through his or her pores, okay? The more of the furniture of that universe that you can give them, the realer that universe becomes. Okay, now there are places, especially in some of my books, the infamous Weber info dump, I had to decide whether or not I was going to have an As You Bob character, As You Know Bob character who would explain. Now I cheated with the Havenites, because I gave their ship commanders, people's commissioners who didn't know a thing, we're technically out of time, who did not know a thing about naval tactics, so that the naval officers would explain it to the people's commissioners and thereby explain it to the readers. But there are some things that the characters need to know for the reader to understand the menu of choices available to them. And you have to get that information into the reader's hands somehow. And that's where the info dumps in my books really come in. Is you know what the option of choices that Honor has are. Now, actually, I did reach that point where I had to have Michelle Hinkey critique her tactics at Cerberus, and wind up by saying, in short, if it was not the most go for broke, all or nothing plan in the history of galactic warfare, I have yet to find the one that was. Because everybody was talking about what a brilliant plan it was, when in fact it was the most desperate what the hell do I do now plan that she could come up with. Okay, and at the end of it, Honor listens to this, and Michelle's critiquing in front of Honor's midshipman that she's invited to dinner, and at the end of it, Honor says, "That's fair." All right. Well, we are over time. I'm sure there's somebody else going to be in here in the 15 minutes.